Welcome to the Council of Better Business Bureau's podcast, The Bistro, where we will discuss today's hottest consumer trends, predict the future with consumer experts, and learn how elite businesses and entrepreneurs continue to push the envelope in today's marketplace.
Hello and welcome to The Bistro. For the Better Business Bureau, I'm your host, Elena Spinola. Well, summer is quickly approaching, and it's a time of year where getting away with family or going to see family is emphasized. However, time is changing, and we don't have to wait until summer to connect with our loved ones. Tracing our heritage is drawing families closer than ever and has become easier, more accessible, and even a trendy thing to do. Thanks to the help of online direct-to-consumer DNA testing companies, for as little as $99 and a simple saliva test, you can uncover a world of ancestry information and interesting insights into your unique ethnicity. Here to help us understand exactly how these DNA tests work, how accurate the results are, other useful information you can find through genetic testing, as well as the potential hidden dangers in sharing your DNA data with an online company, is President and Personalized Medicine Expert Erica Ramos from the National Society of Genetic Counselors. Welcome to the Bistro, Erica.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm really thrilled to be here and help your audience dive a bit deeper into the world of genetics.
Yes, thank you. We're really excited to have this discussion. Can you tell us about the genetic counselors and the National Society of Genetic Counselors?
Absolutely. Genetic counselors are healthcare providers who use their advanced training in medical genetics and also counseling to help patients and their families evaluate how their unique genetic makeup might impact their health. Genetic counselors support all types of people, from those who are looking to understand the cause of a disease they already have or to better maintain their health through disease prevention. We're hearing so much about personalized medicine these days and how that ties to genetic testing. But truly personalized medicine really involves integrating information about your genetics, family history, personal history, and even your environment. And genetic counselors are the experts at this. We consider all those different factors to provide individualized guidance to patients and their families and really help them understand how everything ties together. And then we can help those patients and their healthcare team make decisions about how to use genetic information so that they don't just have facts and data. They have resources that can help them turn information into action.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. The National Society of Genetic Counselors, or NSGC, is the professional organization that supports the more than 4,600 certified genetic counselors across the country. And we do a lot of support and advocacy not only for genetic counselors, but also we think a lot about how that impacts patients. So, for instance, we provide continuing education to genetic counselors in all areas of genetics and genomics so that they're always at the leading edge of what's really a very rapidly evolving field. And that means patients benefit by making sure that we have a highly trained and expert workforce. And of course, we want to make sure that genetic counseling is becoming a household word. We provide many services for people who are interested in learning more about how a genetic counselor can support them, including a consumer-focused website found at aboutgeneticcounselors.com. And we want to make sure that people are really able to connect with us and learn more about how we can help them and how to find us in their own neighborhoods.
Yes. Well, that makes sense because this is a type of information that your average person might not be able to fully understand what it means once you've had a test. So it's obviously very helpful to work with a genetic counselor to kind of understand that. And you spoke a little bit about it, but can you share more specifically what kind of information a genetic test can tell you?
Yeah, sometimes we, talk about your genetic makeup as your blueprint. And I really like this analogy because blueprints are the starting points for buildings. But as a building is constructed, lots of things can impact the final result. This is exactly the same as your genetic makeup. Many things about you are at least partially determined by your DNA or your genetic code. That's something you inherit from both of your parents. And variations in our genes are what make all of us unique. But your environment shapes many things about who you end up being as well. So one easy example to think about is height. We know there are several genetic changes that can influence how tall you are, and your height is generally going to be similar to that of your parents and your family. But your environment also influences height. If you have poor nutrition in childhood, for instance, that could mean that you end up shorter than your genetics would have suggested. And your genetic makeup also contributes to the risk that you or your children could develop a specific condition. Some conditions are mostly caused by your genetics, like conditions called sickle cell disease or cystic fibrosis, which are two common genetic diseases that you might hear about in children. And for others, again, it's really a combination of genetics and environment. When we talk about high cholesterol or high blood pressure, you often hear that these things run in families, but we also know that diet and exercise and things like that will also impact those conditions.
Sure.
So we're still at the very early stages of understanding what all of your genes do and how they relate to every condition, but we are learning more every year, and our opportunity to learn about these things has really never been better now that genetic testing is becoming less expensive and more accessible.
Sure. And speaking of sort of less expensive and more accessible, one type of genetic test that has become really popular among consumers is that sort of ancestry genetic testing. What kind of specific information can be found from this kind of testing, and how do they work, and how reliable are the results?
Ancestry testing is incredibly cool, and I love it because I think that's a really great way for people to get engaged with genetics and start to understand a bit more about genetics in a way that's not necessarily as scary as, looking about things like cancer or Alzheimer's disease. I did genetic testing for Ancestry. I use it all the time when I talk to students, especially, and they get really excited and interested about thinking how their ancestry or where their ancestors came from influenced their genetics today. Every company has its own way of judging your ancestry because each is looking at somewhat different genetic markers. And the general consensus is that they are accurate and probably pretty consistent at the continent level, so Asia, Europe, Africa. But they may be less so at the level of an individual country. So that's where you may see more variability if you do more than one test, or if you have a test from one company and a family member has a test from another. For instance, several tests might consistently say that you're 50% European, but the percentage of English versus Irish versus German may differ from test to test.
Interesting.
And that's not surprising if you think about, when you look back over history, how our borders have changed and how our nationalities have shifted. And it makes sense when we think about, invasions of countries and migrations of different groups, that how we define nationality and all these different ancestries have changed over time.
Sure. Very interesting. And I can certainly understand the fascination. I'm interested to do it myself. And, most people can access the Ancestry test easily and really directly just by ordering the test online or over the phone. But what are some genetic privacy concerns consumers may have? And who should they talk to if they have them?
Sure. This has been a really hot topic lately because we've learned a lot about how Ancestry genetic testing can help you connect with other family members, both close to you and sort of remote family members. And that's a privacy issue that some people might not think about right away. Do you want to interact with other customers of the tests that you're doing? It's pretty standard for Ancestry testing companies to offer a service where you can match with people who they deem to be genetic relatives of you for you. Most of the times, these are really distant relatives, third or fourth cousins or further. But every once in a while, these tests will match you to people who are more closely related. And sometimes you may not have known those people were more closely related.
Right.
Some people consider that actually a benefit of this. If you're somebody who was adopted, or if you have big gaps in your family history or relatives that you just don't know anything about, that may be the reason why you're doing this type of testing, is to learn more about your family. But if that's not the case, then people who use these services should be prepared that they could find unexpected relationships, like finding out that they may have a different biological father than they thought they did, or maybe that they have half-siblings who they didn't know about.
Right.
And not surprisingly, preparing for something like that can be really challenging because, of course, nobody assumes that it's going to happen to them.
Right.
And so when it does happen, you have to kind of choose how to deal with that information, how to talk to your family about it, whether to reach out to those relatives or accept conversations if they reach out to you. And really all of that's going to be different from person to person and family to family.
Sure.
The good thing is that because this can lead to obviously tricky issues, commercial companies who offer a matching service will require that you opt into that service. So during that opt-in process where you decide if you want to be part of that or not, the company should be really clearly alerting you to the benefits and the risks of participating, including that chance that you might discover that you have unexpected relationships with others on the platform.
Sure. And I imagine it's somewhat of a gray area, because if you're the one taking the test, someone might say to you, hey, you might find out information that you don't expect. But if you're someone who did not want to be found or wanted to remain anonymous, that's kind of, interesting too.
Absolutely. And, obviously when we're talking genetics, we're talking family, not just one individual. So if you decide that you want to connect with people and happen to find an unexpected relationship, that can also put you in the challenging position of deciding how to share that within your family. Your family didn't necessarily make the decision to know that. That was something that came from you.
Right.
And we've seen it across the board. Sometimes these end in very fantastic stories where people get to connect in ways that they had never before. And of course, not surprising, sometimes they don't always end up quite that well.
Sure. So there's some online sort of privacy. Tell us about sort of the rights of consumers. What rights do they have to their data, and how can they protect their DNA privacy once they've ordered a genetic test?
Really important question. And I would definitely encourage any consumer of somebody for these at-home DNA tests to find out specifically for that company about the rights to your genetic data. Certainly you have the right to your genetic data, and most of these companies will offer you the option of downloading your data, even more than sort of what they use just for Ancestry. And that's really valuable. It's also important to know that as soon as it's on your laptop or a thumb drive, other people might access it, and it may not be as secure as it was up in the cloud with that testing company. But more importantly, genetic testing companies may share your data with a third party or donate your data for research purposes. And responsible testing companies should only do this with your explicit approval and give you the opportunity to change or withdraw your approval for any of those things. But you should keep in mind that if you withdraw your approval, it only applies from that point forward. If your data has already been shared with your consent, then that can't be taken back.
Okay.
So even though we all approve things like terms and conditions and privacy information all the time without reviewing them, again, I definitely encourage customers of these types of tests to read those things carefully and really ask questions directly of the companies if something's unclear.
Good to know. That's very, very important information. And, one other question that we want to ask is, let's say someone does a genetic testing, either it's out of curiosity, they want to know about their ancestry, or potentially to uncover some health concerns. And let's just say you speak with a genetic counselor, you're trying to understand what these results mean, and you share this with your doctor. What are the ramifications or concerns regarding the privacy of their genetic health information and, becoming part of their medical records?
Well, one of the advantages that has been really put out there as a huge benefit for at-home testing is that it can help us to identify people who didn't know they had genetic risks for certain health issues. And the important thing for consumers to know is that that's why you're taking the test and you really want to take advantage of that information, it means actually moving that information from your at-home test into the healthcare system. And that does have a different set of privacy protections. We just celebrated the 10-year anniversary of when a law called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act was signed. That's also called GINA, which is much simpler. And GINA is a federal law that was designed to protect you and your genetic information from being used in employment decisions and when determining your eligibility for medical insurance. So in other words, your genetic information can't be held against you for your job or being hired for a job or when you receive medical insurance based on the GINA law. But GINA doesn't offer protections in every case. So if you find out, for instance, that you have a risk for Alzheimer's disease, and you're healthy now, but you want to get life insurance or disability or long-term care insurance because of that, that may be something that you have to disclose to those companies when you're buying those policies. And it may be more challenging to do that if you already know you have this information.
Got it.
So if you're not covered by those types of insurance plans, it may be useful to think about what you would want your coverage to be before you go down the road of getting this information.
Got it. Well, I really appreciate you sharing this information because we see the commercials and it's easy to say, hey, I'm going to pay my $99 or whatever it is, and I'm going to get this information. But there's some things to consider, like what you shared. So we really appreciate that. Where can someone find a genetic counselor?
So the easiest way to find a genetic counselor is by going to findageneticcounselor.com.
Okay.
This is a site that's managed by the National Society of Genetic Counselors. So the people that you'll find on there are certified genetic counselors, members of the National Society of Genetic Counselors. And the nice thing about this tool is that it will let you search for genetic counselors in your area that you could see face to face. It will also let you search for genetic counselors who see patients by telephone or by video counseling. And that means if there's not somebody in your backyard, you can actually connect to experts in whatever area you're concerned about, be it at-home testing or cancer or pregnancy, and make sure that you're having access to those counselors even if you can't find them locally.
Got it. Okay. Well, Erica, we want to thank you so much for joining us today on this Bistro. This has been really, really helpful. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. One more time, can you share your website?
Yep, absolutely. So you can go to findageneticcounselor.com if you're looking for a genetic counselor specifically. And you can also visit aboutgeneticcounselors.com that will give you more general information about how to use genetic counselors and how we might be valuable to you.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elaine.
The Better Business Bureau is deeply committed to building and advancing a better marketplace, a trusted marketplace for all, because trust always matters. For the Better Business Bureau and as your host of the Bistro, I'm Elena Spinola, and I thank you for listening. We encourage you to give us your feedback on this episode. Until next time, it's been my pleasure discussing better business and genetic testing with you.
You just enjoyed the Bistro podcast. Be sure to tune in next month for a brand new episode. To learn more about our other shows, visit betterbusiness.blueberry.com. That's betterbusiness.blueberry.com and subscribe. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the Better Business Bureau, Council of Better Business Bureaus, or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Blueberry's Terms of Service.